an, an easy way to become a good conversationalist. Some time ago, I attended a bridge party. I don't like bridge, and there was a woman there who didn't play bridge either. She had discovered that I had once been Lowell Thomas manager before he went on the radio, and that I had traveled in Europe to a great deal while helping him prepare the illustrated travel while he was then delivering. So she said, "Oh, Mr. Carnegie, I do want you to tell me about all the wonderful places you have visited and the sight you have seen." As we sat down to the sofa, she remarked that she and her husband had recently returned from a trip to Africa. Africa, I explained, how interesting. I've always wanted to see Africa, but I never got there except for the 24-hour stay once in Algiers. Tell me, did you visit the became contagious? How fortunate I envy you. You tell me about Africa. That keep her talking for 45 minutes. She never asked for the accent where I had been or what I had seen. She didn't want to hear me talk about travels. Also, when she was an interested listener, so she corresponded acquainted about where she had been. Was she unusual? No mean before I like that. For example, I met a distinguished botanist at a dinner party given by a New York book publisher. I had never talked with botanists before and I found him fascinating. I literally sat on the edge of my chair and listened while he spoke of exotic plants and experimented in developing new forms of plant life and indoor gardens. And even told me a astonishing fact about the humble potato. I had an indoor garden of my own and he was good enough to tell me how to solve some of my problems. As I said, we were at a dinner party. There must have been a dozen other guests, but I violated all the canons of courtesy, ignored everyone else, and talked for hours to the botanist. Midnight came. I said goodnight to everyone and departed. The botanist then turned to our host and paid me several flattering compliments. I was most stimulating. I was this and I was that, and he ended by saying I was the most interesting conversationalist. An interesting conversation is why I had said hardly anything at all. I could not have said anything because I had anything if I had wanted to without changing the subject, for I didn't know any more about botany than I knew about the anatomy of penguin. But I had done this, I had listened intently, I had listened because I was genuinely interested and it felt it naturally that pleasing. That kind of interest listening is one of the highest compliments we can pay anyone. Few human beings, wrote Jack Woodford in Strangers in Love, few human beings could forget the impact flattery of rapt attention. I went even further than giving him rapt attention. I was 40 in my approbation and lavish in my praise. I told him that I had been immensely entertained and instructed, and I had. I told him I wish I had his knowledge, and I did. I told him that I should love to wander the fields with him, and I have. I told him I must see him again, and I did. And so I had him thinking of me as a good conversationalist when in reality I had been merely a good listener and had encouraged him to talk. What is the secret of the mystery of a successful business interview? Well, according to the former Harvard president Charles W. Eliot, there is no mystery about successful business intercourse. Exclusive attention to the person who is speaking to you is very important. Nothing else is so flattering as that. Eliot himself was a past master of the art of listening. Henry James, one of the America's first great novelists, recalled. Dr. Eliot's listening was not mere science but a form of activity. Sitting very erect on the end of his spine with hands on in his lap, making some movement except that he revolved his thumb around each other faster or slower. He faced his interlocutor and seemed to be hearing with his eyes as well as his ears. He listened with his mind and attentively considered what you had to say while you said it. At the end of an interview, the person who had talked to him felt that he had his say. Self-evident, isn't it? You don't have to study for 4 hours in Harvard to discover that. Yet I know, and you know, department store owners will rent expensive space, buy their goods economically, dress their windows appealingly, spend $1,000 in advertising, and then hire clerks who haven't the sense to be good listeners. Clerks who interrupt customers, contradict them, irritate them, and all but drive them from the store. A department store in Chicago almost lost a regular customer who spends several $1,000s each year in that store because the sales clerk will not listen. Mrs. Henrietta Douglas, who took our course in Chicago, had purchased a coat at a special sale. After she had brought it home, she noticed that there was a tear in the lining. She came back the next day and asked the sales clerk to exchange it. The clerk refused even to listen to her complaint. "You bought this at a special sale," she said. She pointed to a sign on the wall. "Read that," she exclaimed. "All sales are final. Once you bought it, you have to keep it. Sew up the lining yourself." But this was damaged merchandise, Mrs. Douglas complained. "Makes no difference," the clerk interrupted. "Finance final." Mrs. Douglas was about to walk out, indignantly swearing never to return to the store ever when she was treated by the department manager, who knew her from her many years of patronage. Mrs. Douglas told her what had happened. The manager listened attentively to the whole story, examined the quote, and then said, "Special sales are final, so we can dispose of the merchandise at the end of the season. But this no written policy does not apply to damaged goods. We will certainly repair or replace the lining, or if you prefer, give you your money back." What a difference in treatment! If that manager had not come along and listened to the customer, or long-term patron of that store could have been lost forever. Listening is just as important in one's home, like as in the world of business. Millie Esposito, Millie Esposito of Croton on Watson, New York, made it her business to listen carefully when one of her children wanted to speak with her. One evening, she was sitting in the kitchen with her son Robert, and after a brief discussion of something that was on his mind, Robert said, "Mom, I know that you love me very much." Mrs. Esposito was touched and said, "Of course I love you very much. Did you doubt it?" Robert responded, "No, but I really know you love me because whenever I want to talk to you about something, you stop whatever you are doing and listen to me." The chronic kicker, even the most violent critic, will frequently soften and be subdued in the presence of a patient, sympathetic listener, or listener who will he silent while the irritative fault finder dials like a kingkeeper and spews the poison out of his system. To illustrate, the New York Telephone Company discovered a few years ago that it had to deal with one of the most vicious customers who ever cost a customer service representative. And he did course, he raved, he threatened to rear the phone out by his roots. He refused to pay certain charges that he declared were false. He wrote letters to the newspaper. He filed innumerable complaints with the Public Service Commission, and he started several suits against the telephone company. At last, one of the company's most skillful troubleshooters was sent to interview this stormy patrol. This troubleshooter listened and let the cantankerous customer enjoy himself pouring out his tirade. The telephone representative listened and said yes and sympathized with his greediness. He rambled on and I listened for nearly 3 hours, the troubleshooter said as he related his experience before one of the author class. Then I went back and listened some more. I interviewed him 4 times, and before the fourth visit was over, I had become a charter member of an organization he was starting. He called it the Telephone Subscribers Protective Association. I am still a member of this organization, and so far as I know, I am the only member in the world today beside Mr. Dash. I listened and sympathized with him on every point that he made during those interviews. He had ever had a telephone representative talk with him that way before, and he became almost friendly. The point on which I wanted to see him was not even mentioned on the first visit, nor was it mentioned on the second or third. But upon the fourth interview, I closed the case completely. He paid all his bills in full, and for the first time in the history of his difficulties with the telephone company, he voluntarily withdrew his complaints from the Public Service Commission. Doubtless, Mr. Had has considered himself a holy crusader, defending the public rights against careless exploitation. But in reality, what he had really wanted was a feeling of impotence. He got this feeling of impotence at first by kicking and complaining, but as soon as he got this feeling of impotence from a representative of the company, he imagined grievance vanished into thin air. One morning years ago, an angry customer stormed into the office of Julian F. Detmer, founder of the Detmer Woolen Company, which later became the world's largest distributor of woolens to the tailoring trade. This man owed us a small sum of money. Mr. Detmer explained to me. The customer denied it, but we know he was wrong. So our credit department had insisted that he pay. After getting a number of letters from our credit department, he packed his trip, made a trip to Chicago, and hurried into my office to inform me not only that he was not going to pay that bill, but that he was never going to buy another dollar worth of goods from the Detmer Woolen Company. I listened patiently to all he had to say. I was tempted to interrupt, but I realized that he would be bad policy. So I let him talk himself out. When he finally simmered down and got in a receptive mood, I said quietly, I want to thank you for coming to Chicago to tell me about this. You have done me a great favor, for if our credit department has annoyed you, it may annoy other customer and that will be just too bad. Believe me, I am far more eager to hear this than you ought to tell it. That was the last thing in the world he expected me to say. I think he was a trifle disappointed because he had come to Chicago to tell me a thing or two. But here I was thanking him instead of scrapping with him. I assured him we would wipe the charts of the books and forget it because he was a very careful man with only one account to look after, while our clerks had to look after thousands. Therefore, he was less likely to be the wrong than we were. I told him that I understood easily how he felt and that if I were in his shoes, I should undoubtedly feel precisely as he did. Since he wasn't going to buy from us anywhere, I recommend some other woolen house. In the past, we had usually lunch together when we came to Chicago, so I invited him to have lunch with me this day. He accepted reluctantly, but when we came back to the office, he placed a larger order than ever before. He returned home in a softened mood and wanting to be just as fair with us as we had been with him. Looked over his bill, found out that had been mislaid, and sent us a check with his apologies. Later, when his wife presented him with a baby boy, he gave his son the middle name of Detmer, and he remained a friend and customer of the house until his death 22 years afterwards. Years ago, a poor Dutch immigrant boy washed the windows of a bakery shop after school to help support his family. His people were so poor that in addition he used to go out in the street with a basket every day and collect stray bits of coal that had fallen in the gutter where the coal wagons had delivered fuel. The boy Edward Book never got more than 6 years of schooling in his life, yet eventually he made himself one of the most successful mechanical editors in the history of American journalism. How did he do it? That is a long story, but how he got his start can be told briefly. He got his start by using the principle advocated in this chapter. He left school when he was 13 and became an office boy for Western Union, but he didn't want 1 minute to give up the idea of an education. Instead, he started to educate himself. He saved his car fares and went without lunch until he had enough money to buy an encyclopedia of American biography, and then he did an unheard of thing. He read the lives of famous people and wrote them asking for additional information about their childhood. He was a good listener. He asked famous people to tell him more about themselves. He wrote General James A. Garfield, who was then running for president, and asked if it was true that he was once a poor boy on a canal, and Garfield replied. He wrote General Grant asking about a certain battle, and Grant drew a map for him and invited this 14-year-old boy to dinner and spent the evening talking to him. Soon our Western Union messenger boy was corresponding with many of the most famous people in the nation. Ralph Waldo Emerson, Oliver Wendell Holmes, Longfellow, Mrs. How to Win Friends and Influence People, Louisa May Alcott, General Sherman, and Jefferson Davis. Not only did he correspond with these distinguished people, but as soon as he got a vacation, he visited many of them as a welcome guest in their homes. The experience imbued him with a confidence that was invaluable. These men and women fired him with vision and ambition that saved his life, and all this, let me repeat, was made possible solely by the application of the principle we are discussing here. Isaac F. Macpherson, a journalist who interviewed hundreds of celebrities, declared that many people fail to make a favorable impression because they don't listen attentively. They have been so much concerned with what they are going to say next that they do not keep their ears open. Very important people have told me that they prefer good listeners to good talkers, but the ability to listen seems rarer than almost any other good trait. And not only important persons crave a good listener, but ordinary folk do too. As the Reader Digest once said, many persons call a doctor when all they want is an audience. During the darkest hour of Civil War, Lincoln wrote to an old friend in Springfield, Illinois, asking him to come to Washington. Lincoln said he had some problems he wanted to discuss with them. The old neighbor called at the White House, and Lincoln talked to him for hours about the advisability of issuing a proclamation Mason freeing the slaves. Lincoln went over all the argument for and against such a move and then read letters and newspaper articles, some denouncing him for not freeing the slaves and others denouncing him for fear he was going to free them. After talking for hours, Lincoln shook hands with his old neighbor, said goodnight, and sent him back to Illinois without even asking for his opinion. Lincoln had done all the talking himself, that seemed to clarify his mind. He seemed to feel easier after that talk. The old friend said Lincoln hadn't wanted advice, he had wanted merely a friendly, sympathetic listener to whom he would on board and himself. That's what we all want when we are in trouble. That is frequently all the irritated customer wants and the dissatisfied employee or the hot friend. One of the great listeners of modern times was Sigmund Freud, a man who made Freud describe his manner of listening. It struck me so forcibly that I shall never forget him. He had qualities which I had never seen in another man. Never had I seen such concentrated attention. There was none of that piercing, soul-penetrating gaze business. His eyes were mild and sincere. His voice was low and kind. His gestures were few. But the attention he gave me, his appreciation of what I said, even what I said it badly, was extraordinary. You have no idea what it meant to be listened to like that. If you want to know how to make people shun you and laugh at it behind your back and even despise you, here is a recipe. Never listen to anyone for long. Talk incessantly about yourself. If you have an idea while the other person is talking, don't wait for him or her to finish. Both write in and interrupt in the middle of sentence. Do you know people like that? I do, unfortunately, and the astonishing part of it is that some of them are prominent. Boards, that is all they are, boards intoxicated with their own egos, drunk with a sense of their own importance. People who talk only of themselves think only of themselves, and those people who think only of themselves. Dr. Nicholas Murray Butler, long-time president of Columbia University, said, are hopelessly uneducated. They are not educated, said Dr. Butler, no matter how instructive they may be. So if we aspire to be good conversationalists, be an attentive listener, to be interesting, be interested. Ask questions that other person will enjoy answering. Encourage them to talk about themselves and their accomplishments. Remember that the people you are talking to are 100 times more interested in themselves and their wants and problems than they are in you and your problems. A person to that means more to a person than a famine in China which kills a million people. A boy on one stake interests one more than a 40 or 20 in Africa. Think of the next time you start a conversation. Be a good listener, encourage others to talk about themselves. How to impress people. Everyone was ever a guest of Theodore Roosevelt. Everyone who was ever a guest of Theodore Roosevelt was astonished at the range and diversity of his knowledge, whether his sister was a cowboy or a rough rider, a New York politician or a diplomat. Roosevelt knew what to say and how was it done. The answer was simple. Whenever Roosevelt expected a visitor, he set off late the night before reading of the subject in which he knew his guest was particularly interested. For Roosevelt knew, as all leaders knew, that the royal route to a person's heart is to talk about the thing he or she treasures most. The genial William Lyon Phelps, essayist and professor of literature at Yale, learned this lesson early in life. When I was 8 years old and was spending a weekend visiting my aunt Libby Lindsay at her home in Stratford on the Housatonic, he wrote in his essay on women after a middle-aged man called one evening, and after a polite skirmish with my aunt, he devoted his attention to me. At the time, it happened to be excited about boats, and the visitor discussed the subject in a way that seemed to be particularly interesting. After he left, I spoke of him with enthusiasm. What a man! My aunt informed me he was a New York lawyer and he cared nothing whatever about boats, and he took not the slightest interest in the subject. But why then did he talk all the time about boats? Because he's a gentleman. He saw you were interested in boats and he talked about the things he knew would interest and please. He made himself agreeable. And William Lyon Phelps added, I never forget my aunt's remark. As I read this chapter, I have before met a letter from Edwaliel Salif, who was active in Boy Scout work. One day I found I needed a favor. Wrote Mr. Salif, a big scout jamboree was coming off in Europe, and I wanted the president of one of the largest corporations in America to pay the expense of one of my boys for the trip. Fortunately, just before I went to see this man, I heard that he had drawn a check for $1 million and that after it was cancelled, he had had it framed. So the first thing I did when I entered his office was to ask to see the check. A check for $1 million. I told him I never knew that anybody has ever written such a check and that I wanted to tell my boss that I have actually seen a check for $1 million. He gladly showed it to me. I admitted it and asked him to tell me all about how it happened to be drawn. You notice, don't you, that Mr. Salif didn't begin by talking about the Boy Scout or the jamboree in Europe, or what it was he wanted. He talked in terms of what interested the other men. Here's the result. Recently, the man I was interviewing said, "Oh, by the way, what was it you wanted to see me over?" So I told him. To my vast surprise, Mr. Salif continuously not only granted immediately what I asked for, but much more. I had asked him to send only one boy to Europe, but he sent 5 boys and myself. Gave me a letter of credit for $1,000 and told us to stay in Europe for 7 weeks. He also gave me a letter of introduction to his branch president, put him then at his service, and he himself met us in Paris and showed us the town. Since then, he has given jobs to some of the boys whose parents were in want, and he is still active in our group. Yet I know if I hadn't found out what he was interested in and got involved at first, I wouldn't have found him 1/10 as easy to approach. Is this a valuable technique to use in business? Is it, let's say, take Henry J. Duvernoy of Duvernoy and Sons of Wholesale Baking from New York. Mr. Duvernoy had been trying to sell bread to a certain New York hotel. He had called on manager every week for 4 years. He went to the same social address the manager attended. He even took rooms in the hotel and lived there in order to get the business what he felt. Then said Mr. Duvernay, after studying human relation, I resolved to change my tactics. I decided to find out what interested this man, what caught his enthusiasm. I discovered he belonged to a society of hotel executives called the Hotel Greeters of America. He not only belonged but his bubbling enthusiasm had made him president of the organization and president of international greeters. No matter where its convention were held, he would be there. So when I saw him the next day, I began talking about the greeters. What a response I got! What a response! He talked to me for half an hour about the greeters' stones private enthusiasm. I could plainly see that this society was not only the hobby; it was the passion of his life. Before I left his office, he had sold me a membership in his organization. In the meantime, I had said nothing about bread, but a few days later, the steward of his hotel phoned me to come over with sample and fries. I don't know what you did to the old boy, the steward greeted me, but he sure is sold on you. Think of it, I had been drumming at this man for 4 years, trying to get his business, and I would still be drumming at him if I hadn't finally taken the trouble to find out what he was interested in and what we enjoy talking about. Edward E. Harriman of Hagerstown, Maryland, chose to live in the beautiful Cumberland Valley of Maryland after he completed his military service. Unfortunately, at the time there were few jobs available in the area. A little research uncovered the fact that a number of companies in the area were either owned or controlled by an unusual businessman named R.J. Funkhauser, whose rise to poverty to with Mr. Harriman. However, he was known for being inaccessible to job seekers, Mr. Harriman wrote. I interviewed a number of people and found that his major interest was anchored in his drive for power and money. Since he protected himself from people like me by use of a dedicated assistant secretary, I studied her interests and goals, and only then I paid an unannounced visit at her office. She had been Mr. Funkhauser orbiting satellite for over 15 years. When I told her I had a proposition for him which might translate itself into financial and political success for him, she became enthused. I also conversed with her about her constructive participation in his success. After this conversation, she arranged for me to meet Mr. Funkhauser. I entered his huge and impressive office determined not to ask directly for a job. He was seated behind a large carved desk and thundered at me. How about it, young man? I said, Mr. Funkhauser. I believe I can make money for you. He immediately rose and invited me to sit on one of the last unholstered chairs. I enumerated my ideas and the qualification I had to realize this idea as well as how they would contribute to his personal success and that of his business. RJ, as he became known to me, hired me at once, and for every 20 years I had grown in this enterprise, and we both have prospered. Talking in terms of other personal interest pays for both parties, however, yes, Horjic, a leader in the field of employee communication, has always followed this principle. When asked what reward he got from it, Mr. Horjic responded that he would not only receive a different reward each person, but that in general the reward had been an but in general the reward had been an enlargement of his life each time he spoke to someone. Principle 5. Talk in terms of other person interest. How to make people like you instantly. I was waiting in line to register a letter in the post office at 33rd Street and 18th Avenue in New York. I noticed that the clock appeared to be bored with the job waiting envelopes, handing out stamps, making change, issuing receipt the same monotonous trend year after year. So I said to myself, I'm going to try to make that clock like me. Obviously, to make him like me, I must say something nice, not about myself, but about him. So I asked myself, what is there about him that I can honestly admire? This is sometimes a hard question to answer, especially with stranger, but in this case, it happened to be easy. I instantly saw something I admired knowing. So while he was waiting my envelope, I remarked with enthusiasm. I certainly wish I had a head of hair. He looked up, half startled, his face beaming with a smile. Well, it isn't as good as it used to be, he said modestly. I assured him, although it might have lost some of its Christian glory, nevertheless it was still magnificent. He was immensely pleased. We carried on President return from Washington, and the last thing he said to me was, many people had admired my hair. I will bet that person went out to lunch that day walking on air. I bet he went home at night and he told his wife about it. I will bet he looked in the mirror and said, it is a beautiful head of hair. I told this story once in public and a man asked me afterward, what did you want to get out of him? What I was trying to get out of him, what was I trying to get out of him? If we are so contemptibly selfish that we can radiate a little happiness and pass on a bit of honest appreciation without trying to get something and trying to get something out of the other person return. If our souls are no bigger than our souls, perhaps we shall meet with the failure we so richly deserve. Oh yes, I did want something out of that chap. I wanted something fresh this and I got it. I got the feeling that I had done something for him. Without him, his being able to do anything whatever in return for me. This is a feeling that goes and sinks in your memory long after the incident is past. There is one all important law of human conduct. If we obey the law, we shall almost never get into trouble. In fact, that law is obeyed will bring us countless friends and constant happiness. For the very instant we break the law, we shall get into endless trouble. The law is this: always make the other person feel important. John Dewey, as we have already noted, says that the desire to be important is the deepest origin in human nature, and William James said, the deepest principle in human nature is the craving to be appreciated. As I have already pointed out, it is this source that differentiates us from the animal. It is the source that has been responsible for civilization itself. Philosophers had been speculating on the rules of human relationship for thousands of years, and out of all the speculation, there has evolved only one important precept. It is not new. It is as old as history. Zoroaster taught it to his followers in Persia 2500 years ago. Confucius preached it in China 24 centuries ago. Lao Tse, the founder of Taoism, taught it to his disciples in the Valley of Tan. Buddha placed it on the bank of the holy Gangas 500 years before Christ. The sacred books of Hinduism taught it 1000 years before that. Jesus taught it among the stony hills of Judea 19 centuries ago. Jesus summed it up in one thought: probably the most important rule in the world: do unto others as you would have do unto you. Do unto others as you do unto others as you would have others do unto you. You want the approval of those with whom you come in contact. You want the recognition of a few words. You want a feeling that you are important in your little world. You don't want to listen to cheap, insincere flattery, but you do crave sincere appreciation. You want your friends and associates to be, as Charles Scott put it, 40 in the approbation and lavish in the praise. All of us want that. So let's obey the golden rule and give unto others what we would have others give unto us. How, when, where? The answer is all the time, everywhere. David G. Smith of Eau Claire, Wisconsin, told one of our classes how he handled a delicate situation when he was asked to take charge of the refreshment booth at a charity concert. The night of a concert, I arrived at a park and found out elderly ladies in a very bad humor standing next to the refreshment stand. Apparently, he thought that she was in charge of this project. As I stood there pondering what to do, me of the members of the sponsoring committee appeared and handed me a cash box and thanked me for taking over the project. She introduced Rose and Jane as my helpers and then ran off. A great silence ensued. Realizing that the cash box was a symbol of authority of sorts, I gave the box to Rose and explained that I might not be able to keep the money straight and that if she took care of it, it would feel better. I then suggested to Jane that she show two teenagers who had me sent to refreshment how to operate the soda machine and I asked her to be responsible for that part of the project. The evening was very enjoyable with Rose happily counting the money, Jane supervising the teenager and me enjoying the concert. You don't have to wait until you are ambassador to France or chairman of the climate committee of your laws before you use this philosophy of appreciation. You can work magic with it almost every day. If, for example, the waitress brings us mashed potatoes when we have ordered French fried, let's say, I'm sorry to trouble you, but I prefer French fried. She will probably reply, no trouble at all, and I will be glad to change the potatoes because we have shown respect for her. Little phrase says, I'm sorry to trouble you, would you be so kind as to, won't you please, won't you mind, thank you. Little courtesy like this who is the fox of monotonous grind of everyday life, and instantly they all are all the hallmark of good breeding. Let's take another illustration. Hale Cain's novel Christian, the Deemster, the Maxman among them were all bestsellers at the early part of this century. Millions of people read his novels, countless millions. He was the son of a blacksmith. He never had more than 8 years schooling in his life, yet when he died, he was the richest literary man of his time. The story goes like this. Halkin loved sonnets and ballads, so he devoured all of Dante Gabriel Rossetti poetry. He even wrote a lecture chanting the praise of Rossetti's artistic achievement and sent to a copy to Rossetti himself. Rossetti was delighted. Any young man who has a certain opinion of my ability, Rossetti will probably say to himself most brilliant. So Rossetti invited his blacksmith son to come to London and act as his secretary. That was the turning point in Halkin's life, for in his new position he met the literary artists of the day. Profiting by their advice and inspired by the encouragement, he launched upon a career that emblazoned his name across the sky. His home, Greyback Castle on the Isle of Man, became a mecca for tourists from the far corners of the world, and he left a multi-million-dollar estate. Yet who knows, he might have died poor and unknown had he not written an essay expressing his admiration for a famous man. Such is the power, the stupendous power of sincere heartfelt appreciation. Rossetti considered himself important. That is not strange. Almost everyone considers himself important, very important. The life of many a person could probably be changed if only someone would make him feel important. Ronald J. Rowland, who is one of the instructors of our course in California, is also a teacher of arts and craft. He wrote to us about a student named Chris in his beginning craft class. Chris was very quiet, shy boy, lacking in self-confidence, the kind of student that often does not receive the attention he deserves. I also teach an advanced class that he has grown to be somewhat of status symbol and a privilege for a student to have earned the right to be in it. On one step, Chris was diligently working at his steps. I really felt when there was a hidden fire deep inside him. I asked him if he would like to be in the advanced class. How I wish I could express the look in Chris' face, the emotion in that sigh, 14-year-old boy trying to hold back his tears. Who me, Mr. Rowland, am I good enough? Yes, Chris, you are good enough. I had to leave at the point because tears was coming to my eyes. As Chris walked out of class that day, seemingly 2 inches taller, he looked me with the bright blue eyes and said in a positive voice, "Thank you, Mr. Rowland. Chris taught me a lesson I will never forget. Our deep desire to feel important to help me never forget the school. I made a sign which read, 'You are important.' This sign hangs in front of the classroom for all to see and to remind me that each student I face is equally important." The on bar, the truth is that almost all people you meet feel themselves superior to you in some way, and a sure way to their heart is to let them realize in some subtle way that you recognize their importance and recognize it sincerely. Remember when Emerson said, "Every man I met is my superior in some way, in that I learn for him." Argument identity. Is my superior. And the positive part of it is that frequently those who had the last justification for a feeling of achievement bluster of their egos by a show of humiliated conceit which is truly nauseating. As Shakespeare put it, men proud, men dressed in with authority, pay suspense that say tricks before high heaven as make the angels weep. I am going to tell you how business people in my own course have applied this principle with remarkable result. Let's take the case of a Connecticut attorney. Because of his relative, he preferred not to have his name mentioned. Shortly after joining the course, Mr. R drove to Long Island with his wife to visit some of her relatives. She left him to chat with an old aunt of hers and then rushed off by horse to visit some of the young relatives. Since he soon had to give a speech professionally on how he applied the principle of appreciation, he thought he would gain some worthwhile experience talking with the elderly lady. So he looked around the house to see what he could honestly admire. This house was built in about 1890, wasn't it? He inquired. Yes, she replied, that is precisely there it was built. It reminds me of the house I was born in, he said. It's beautiful, well built, roomy. You know they don't build houses like this anymore. You are right, the old lady agreed. The young folks nowadays don't care for beautiful homes. All they want is small apartment and then they go gadding about in their automobiles. This is a dream house, he said in a voice vibrating with tender memories. This house was built with love, my husband and I dream about it for years before we built it. We didn't have an architect, we planned it all ourselves. She told Mr. R about the house and he expressed his hearty admiration for the beautiful treasures she had picked up in her travels and cherished over a lifetime. Paisley shawls and old English tea set, wood china, French beds and chairs, Italian paintings and silk draperies that had been once hung in a French chateau. After showing Mr. R to the house, she took him out to the garage. There, Jack up on the blocks was a Packard car in mint condition. My husband bought that car for me shortly after he passed on, she said softly. I have never ridden I have never ridden in it since it's there. You appreciate nice thing and I am going to give this car to you. Buy on tea, said. You overwhelm me. I appreciate your generosity, of course, but I cannot possibly accept it. I am not even a relative of yours. I have a new car and you have many relatives that would like to have that back. And relatives, she exclaimed, yes, I have relatives who are just willing till I die so they can get the car, but they are not going to get it. If you don't want to give it to them, you can very easily sell it to a second-hand dealer, he told her. Sell it, she cried. Do you think I would sell this car? Do you think I could stand to see strangers riding up and down the street in the car that my husband bought for me? I wouldn't dream of selling it. I am going to give it to you. You appreciate beautiful things. She tried to get out of acid in the car, but he could not without hurting feeling. This lady lived all alone in a big house with her Paisley saw her friends' antics and memories was striving for a little recognition. She had once been young and beautiful and sought after. She had once built a house warm with love and had collected things from all over Europe to make it beautiful. Now, in the isolated loneliness of old age, she craved a little human warmth, a little genuine appreciation, and no one gave it to her. And when she found it like a spring in the desert, her gratitude could not adequately express itself with anything less than a gift of her cherished packet. Let's take another case. Donald M. McCon, who was superintendent of Lewis and Valentine, North Women and landscape architect in Bryan, New York, related this incident. Shortly after I attended the talk on how to win friends and influence people, I was landscaping the estate of a famous attorney. The owner came out to give me a few instructions about where he wished to plant a mass of rhododendrons and azaleas. I said, George, you have a lovely hobby. I've been admiring your beautiful dogs. I understand you win a lot of blue ribbons every year at a show in Madison Square Garden. The effect of this little expression of appreciation was striking. Yes, the George replied, I do have a lot of fun with my dogs. Would you like to see my kennel? He spent almost an hour showing me stocks and prices they had won. He even brought out the pedigrees and screamed over the bloodlines responsible for such beauty and intelligence. Finally, turning to me, he asked, do you have any small children? Yes, I do. I replied, I have a son. Yeah, well, wouldn't be he like a puppy? The judge inquired. Oh yes, he will be tickled pink. All right, I am going to give him one. The judge announced. He started telling me how to feed the puppy. Then he paused his pocket. If I tell you, I will write it out. So the judge were in the house, typed out the pedigree and feeding instructions. Give me a puppy worth several $100 and 1 hour and 15 minutes of his valuable time last because I had expressed my honest admiration for his hobby and achievements. George Eastman of Kodak fame invented the transparent film that made motion picture possible, amassed a fortune of $100 million and made him so one of the most famous businessmen on earth. Yet, in spite of all this tremendous accomplishment, he craved little recognition even as you and I. To Eastwood, when Eastman was building the Eastman Institute of Music and also Kilburn Hall in Rochester, James Adamson, then president of the Superior Seating Company of New York, wanted to get the order to supply the theatre chairs for this building. Warning the architect, Mr. Adamson made an appointment to see Mr. Eastman in Rochester. When Adamson arrived, the architect said, I know you want to get this order, but I can tell you right now that you won't stand a ghost of a show if you take more than 5 minutes of George Eastman time. He is a strict disciplinarian, he is very busy, so tell your story quickly and get out. Adamson was prepared to do just that. When he was ushered into the room, he saw Mr. Eastman bending over a pile of paper at his desk. Presently, Mr. Eastman looked up, removed his glass and walked toward the architect and Mr. Adamson saying, Good morning, gentlemen, what can I do for you? The architect introduced them and then Mr. Adamson said, While we've been waiting for you, Mr. Eastman, I have been admiring your office. I will not mind working in a room like this myself. I am in the interior woodworking business and I never saw a more beautiful office in all my life. George Eastman replied, You remind me of something I had almost forgotten. It is beautiful, isn't it? I enjoyed it a great deal when it was possible, but I come here now with a lot of other things on my mind. I sometimes don't even see the room for weeks at a time. Adamson walked over and rubbed his hand across the panel. This oak, isn't it? A little different except from Italian wood. Yes, Eastman replied. Imported English work. It was selected for me by a friend who specializes in fine woods. The Eastman showed him about the room. Commenting on the proportions, the color in the hand carving, and other effects he had helped to plan and execute. While drifting over the room, admiring the woodwork, they paused before a window, and George Eastman, in his modest, soft-spoken way, pointed out some of the institutions through which he was trying to help humanity. The University of Rochester, the General Hospital, the Homeopathic Hospital, the Friendly Home, the Children's Hospital. Mr. Adamson congratulated him warmly on the idealistic way he was using his post to alleviate the suffering of humanity. Presently, George Eastman unlocked a glass case and pulled out the first camera he had ever owned, an invention he had bought from an Englishman. Adamson questioned him at length about his early struggle to get started in business, and Mr. Eastman spoke with real feeling about the poverty of his childhood, telling how his widowed mother had kept a boarding house while he clocked in an insurance office. The terror of poverty haunted him day and night, and he resolved to make enough money so that his mother would not have to work. Mr. Adamson drew him out with this further question, listened absorbed while he related the story of his experiment with photographic plates. He told how he had worked in an office all day and sometimes experimented all night, taking only brief naps while the chemicals were working, sometimes working and sleeping in his clothes for 22 hours at a stretch. James and Adamson had been ushered into Eastman office at 15:15 and had been warned that he must not take more than 5 minutes. What an hour had passed, then 2 hours passed, and they were still talking. Finally, George Eastman turned to Adamson and said, "The last time I was in Japan, I bought some shells, brought them home, and put them in my son porch, but the son peeled the paint. So I went downtown the other day and bought some paint and painted the chair myself. Would you like to see what sort of job I can do painting chairs? All right, come up to my home and have lunch with me, and I will show you." After lunch, Mr. Eastman showed Adamson the chairs he had brought from Japan. They weren't worth more than a few dollars. What George Eastman, now a multimillionaire, was proud of them because he himself had painted them. The order of the seat amounted to 90,000 watt. Do you suppose to get the order, James Adamson or one of his competitors? From the time of the study until Mr. Eastman, the DA, and James Adamson were close friends. Claudie Maris, a restaurant owner in Rouen, France, sued his principal and saved his restaurant the loss of a key employee. The woman had been in his employ for 5 years and was a vital link between young Maris and his staff for 21 people. He was shocked to receive a restaurant letter from her advising him of her resignation. Young Maris reported, "I was very surprised and even more disappointed because I was under the impression that I had been fair to her and receptive to her need. In as much as she was friend as well as an employee, I probably had taken her too much for granted and maybe was even more demanding of her than of other employees. I could not, of course, accept this resignation without some explanation. I took her aside and said, 'Paulette, you must understand that I cannot accept your resignation. You mean a great deal to me and to this company, and you are as important to the success of this restaurant as I am.' I repeated this in front of the entire staff, and I invited her to my home and reiterated my confidence in her with my family present. Paulette withdrew her resignation, and today I can rely on her as never before. I frequently reinforce this by expressing my appreciation for what she does and showing her how important she is to me and to the restaurant. Talk to people about themselves," said Disraeli, one of the shrewdest men who ever ruled the British Empire. "Talk to people about themselves and they will listen for hours. Make the other person feel important and do it sincerely." Become genuinely interested in other people. Principal to smile. Principal to remember that a person name is the person the sweetest and most important sound in language. Be a good listener, encourage others to talk about themselves, to talk about so other people interest with all the people and things like this. Okay. You can't win an argument. Shortly after the close of World War I, I learned an invaluable lesson one night in London. I was manager at the time of Sir Ross Smith. During the war, Sir Ross admitted the Australian ace out in Palestine, and shortly after peace was declared, he astonished the world by flying halfway around 1830. No such feat had ever been attempted before. It created a tremendous sensation. The Australian government awarded him $50,000. The King of England knighted him, and for a while he was the most talked about man under the Union Jack. I was attending a banquet one night given in Sir Ross' honor, and during the dinner, the man sitting next to me told a humorous story which hinged on the quotation. There's a divinity that saves our ends, rock you them how we will. The raconteur mentioned that the quotation was from the Bible. He was wrong. I knew it positively. There could not be the slightest doubt about it, and so to get a feeling of impression and discipline or superiority, I appointed myself as an unsolicited and unwelcome committee of one to parade him. He stuck to his guns. What from Shakespeare impossible, absurd, that the quotation was from the Bible. and he knew it. The storyteller was sitting on my right, and Frank Gammond, an old friend of mine, was seated at my left. Mr. Gammond has devoted years to study of Shakespeare, so the storyteller and I agreed to submit the question to Mr. Gammond. Mr. Gammond listened, kicked me under the table, and then said, "Tell you are wrong. The gentleman's right. It is from the Bible." On our way home that night, I said to Mr. Gammond, "Frank, you know that quotation was from Shakespeare." "Yes, of course," he replied, handed Act 5, Scene 2. "But we were guests at a festive occasion, my dear Dale. Why prove to a man he is wrong? Is that going to make him like you? Why not let him save his face? He did not ask for your opinion, he didn't want it. Why argue with him? Always avoid the acute angle." The man who said that taught me a lesson I will never forget. I not only had made the storyteller uncomfortable, but had put my friend in an embarrassing situation. How much better it would have been had I not become argumentative. It was a sorely needed lesson because I had been an inveterate arguer. During my youth, I had argued with my brother about everything under the Milky Way. When I went to college, I studied logic and argumentation and went in for debating contest. Talk about being from Missouri, I was born there. I had to be soon. Later, I taught debating and argumentation in New York, and once I am awesome to admit, I plan to write a book on subject. Since then, I have listened to, engaged in, and watched the effect of thousands of arguments. As a result of all this, I have come to conclusion that there is only one way under high habit to get the best of an argument, and that is to avoid it. Avoid it as you will have avoid rattlesnakes and earthquakes. 9 times out often an argument is with each of the contestants more firmly convinced that ever that is absolutely right. You can't win an argument, you can't, because if you lose it, you lose it, and if you win it, you lose it. Why? Well, suppose you triumph over the other man and shoot him argument full of holes and prove that he is non-composed mentis, then you what? You will feel fine, but what about him? You have made him feel inferior. You have hurt his pride. He will listen to triumph, and a main convince of this rule is of the same opinion still. Years ago, Patrick J. O. had joined one of our class. He had had little education, and now he loved a scrap. He had once been a chauffeur, and he came to me because he had been trying without much success to sell trucks. A little questioning brought out the fact that he was continually stepping with and antagonizing the very people he was trying to do business with. If a prospect said anything derogatory about the trucks he was selling, Pat saw red and was right at the customer's throat. Pat won a lot of argument in those days. As he said to me afterwards, I often walk out of an office saving. I told the I told that board something, sure I had told him something, but I hadn't told him anything. MB first problem was not to reach Patrick J. O. had to talk. My immediate task was to train him to refrain from talking and to avoid verbal fight. Mr. O here became one of the first star salesmen for the White Motor Company in New York. How did he do it? Here is the story in his own words. If I walk into a buyer office and now and he says, "Wait, a white truck, they are no good. I will not take one if you give it to me. I am going to buy the Who's It truck." I say the Who's It is a good truck. If you buy the Who's It, you will never make a mistake. Those Who's It's are made by a fine company and sold by good people. He is speechless, then there is no room for an argument. If he says the Who's It is best and I say, "Sure it is," he has to stop. He can keep on all afternoon saying it's the best one. I am agreeing with them. We then get off the subject of Who's It and we begin to talk about the good point of the white truck. There was a time when a remark like his first one would There was a time when a remark like this first one would have made me see scarlet and red and orange. I would start arguing against it, and the more I argued against it, the more my prospect argued in favor of it, and the more he argued, the more he sold himself on my competitor's product. As I look back now, I wonder how I was ever able to sell anything. I lost years of my life in scrapping and arguing. I keep my mouth shut now, it pays. As wild old Frank Franklin used to say, if you argue and rankle and contradict, you may receive a victory sometimes, but it will be an empty victory because you will be never get your opponent goodwill. So figure it out for yourself. Which would you rather have, an academic theoretical victory or a personal goodwill? You can seldom have both. The Boston Transcript once printed with the speed of significant doggerel. Here lies the body of William J., who died maintaining his right of way. He was right, dead right as he sped along, and is just as dead as if he were wrong. You may be right, dead right as you sped along in your argument, but as far as changing or another mind is concerned, you will probably be just as futile as if you were wrong. Frederick S. Parents, as an income tax consultant, had been disputing and wrangling for hours with a government tax inspector. An item of $9,000 was at stake. Mr. Patterson claimed that his $9,000 was in reality a bad debt, that it will never be collected and it ought not to be taxed. Bad debt, my eye, retorted the inspector. It must be taxed. This inspector was cold, arrogant, and stubborn. Mr. Patterson said he told the story to the class. Reason was wasted and so were facts. The longer we argued, the more stubborn he became. So I decided to avoid argument, change the subject, and give him appreciation. I said, I suppose this is a very petty matter in comparison with the really important, difficult decision you are required to make. I made a study of taxation myself, but I had to get my knowledge from books. You are getting hours from the firing line of experience. I sometimes wish I had a job like yours. It will teach me a lot. It meant every word I said. I meant every word I said. Well, the inspector straightened up, initially leaned back and talked for a long time about his work, telling me of the clever plots he had uncovered. His tone gradually became friendly and presently he was telling me about his children. As he left, he advised me that he would consider my problem further and give me his decision in a few days. He called at my office 3 days later and informed me that he had decided to leave the tax return exactly as it was filed. This tax inspector was demonstrating one of the most common of human frailties. He wanted a feeling of importance, and as long as Mr. Parson agreed with him, he got his feeling of importance by loudly asserting his authority. But as soon as this importance was admitted and the argument stopped and he was permitted to expand his record, he became a sympathetic and kindly human being. Buddha said, hatred is never ended by hatred but by love, and a misunderstanding is never ended by argument but by tact, diplomacy, conciliation and sympathetic desire to see the other person's viewpoint. Lincoln once reprimanded a young army officer for indulging in a violent controversy with an associate. No man who is resolved to make the most of himself, said Lincoln, can spare time for personal contention. Still less can afford to take the consequence, including the mutation of his temper and the loss of self-control. Yield larger things to which you show no more than equal rights, and yield lesser ones to clearly your own. Better give your part to a dog than be beaten by him in contesting for the right. Even killing the dog will not cure the bite. In an article in Bits and Pieces, some suggestions are made on how to keep a disagreement from becoming an argument. Welcome the disagreement. Remember the slogan. When two partners always agree, one of them is not necessary. If there is some point you haven't thought about, be thankful it is brought to your attention. Perhaps a disagreement is an opportunity to be corrected before you make a serious mistake. Distrust is the first instinctive impression. Our first natural reaction in a disagreement situation is to be defensive. Be careful, keep calm, and watch out for your first reaction. It may be you at your worst, not your best. Control your temper. Remember, you can measure the size of a person by what makes him or her angry. Listen first. Give your opponent a chance to talk. Let me finish. Do not resist, defend, or debate. This only raises barriers. Try to build bridges of understanding. Don't build higher barriers of misunderstanding. Look for areas of agreement. When you have heard your opponent out, well first on the points and areas on which you agree. Be honest. Look for areas where you can admit error and say so. Apologize for a mistake. It will help disarm your opponent and reduce defensiveness. Promise to think about over your opponent. Ideas and study them carefully and mean it. Your opponent may be right. It is a lot easier at this stage to agree to think about the force them to move rapidly ahead and find yourself in a position where your opponent can say, "We tried to tell you, but you will not listen." Thank your opponent sincerely for the interest. Anyone who takes the time to disagree with you is interested in the same thing you are. Think of them as people who really want to help you and you may turn your opponent into friends. Postpone action to give both sides time to think through the problem. Such that a new meeting be held later that day or the next day when all the facts may be brought to be bear. In preparation for this meeting, ask yourself some hard questions. Could my opponent be right, partly right? Is there truth or merit in that question or argument? Is my reaction one that will relieve the problem or will it just relieve any frustration? Will my reaction drive my opponent further away or draw them closer to me? Will my reaction elevate the estimation good people have for me? Will I win or lose? What price will I have to pay if I win? If I am quiet about it, will the disagreement be blew over? Is the difficult situation an opportunity for me? Opera tenors and periods after she was married nearly 50 years once said, "My wife and I had made a pact a long time ago and we created no matter how angry we were with each other. When one waits, the other should listen because one to because here there is no competition, there is just noise and bad vibration." Austere way of making enemies and how to avoid it. When Theodore Roosevelt was in the White House, he confessed that if he could be right 75% of the time, he would reach the highest measure of his expectation. If that was the highest rating that one of the most distinguished men of the 20th century could hope to obtain, what about you and me? If you can be sure of being right only 55% of the time, you can go down to Wall Street and make $1 million a day. If you can be sure of being right even 55% of the time, why should you tell other people they are wrong? You can tell people they are wrong by a look or an intonation or a gesture just as eloquently as you can in words. And if you tell them they are wrong, do you make them want to agree with you? Never. For it, you have struck a direct blow at their intelligence, judgment, pride, and self-respect. That will make them want to strike back. What if you never make them want to change their mind? You may then holler at them all the logic of Plato or an Immanuel Kant, but you know you will not alter their opinion, for you have hurt their feeling. Never begin by announcing, "I'm going to prove so and so to you." That's bad. That's tantamount to saying, "I'm smarter than you are. I'm going to tell you a thing or two and make you change your mind." That is a challenge. It arouses opposition and makes the listener want to battle with you before you even start. It is difficult under even the most winning condition to change people's mind. So why make it harder? Why handicap yourself? If you are going to prove anything, you don't let anybody know it. Do it so subtly, so adroitly that no one will feel that you are doing it. This was expressed so simply by Alexander Pope. Men must be taught as if you taught them not, and things unknown proposed as things forgot. For 300 years of Galileo said, "You cannot teach a man anything, you can only help him find it within himself." As Lord Chesterfield said to his son, "Be wiser than other people if you can, but do not tell them so." So repeatedly follows in Athens one thing only I know, and that is that I know nothing. Well, I can hope to be any smarter than Shakespeare, so I have quit telling people they are wrong, and I find that is pace. If a person makes a statement that you think is wrong, yes, even that you know is wrong, isn't it better to begin by saying, "Well, now look, I thought otherwise, but I may be wrong. I frequently am, and if I am wrong, I want to be put right. Let's examine the facts." There is positive magic in such phrases as, "I may be wrong, I frequently am. Let's examine the facts." Nobody in the heavens above or on earth beneath or in the waters under the earth will ever object to your saying, "I may be wrong, let's examine the facts." One of our class members who used his approach in dealing with customers was Arlo Delenki, a Dodge dealer in Billings, Montana. He reported that because of the pressure of the automobiles business, he was often hard-boiled and careless when dealing with customer complaints. This caused flair, tempers, loss of business, and general unpleasantness. He told his class, recognizing that this was getting me nowhere fast, I tried a new track. I will say something like this: "Our dealership has made so many mistakes that I am frequently ashamed. We may never heard in your case telling you about it. This approach becomes quite disarming, and by the time the customer releases feeling he is usually much more reasonable when it comes to settling the matter. In fact, several customers have thanked me for having such an understanding attitude. And two of them had even brought in plans to buy new cars in this highly competitive market. We need more of this type of customer, and I believe that showing respect for all customer opinion, treating them diplomatically and courteously will help beat the competition. You will never get into trouble by admitting that you may be wrong. That will stop all argument and inspire your opponent to be just as fair and open and broad-minded as you are. It will make him want to admit that he too may be wrong. If you know positively that a person is wrong and you bluntly tell him or her, so what happens? Let me illustrate. Mr. Yes Ayung, New York attorney once argued a rather important case before the United States Supreme Court. The case involved a considerable sum of money and an important question of law. During the argument, one of the Supreme Court justices said to him, "The statute of limitation in Admiralty law is 6 years, is it not?" Mr. Yes stopped, stared at the justice for a moment, and then said bluntly, "Your Honor, there is no statute of limitation in Admiralty." A horse fell on the court, said Mr. Yes, as he related his experience to one of the author class. And the temperature in the room seemed to drop to zero. I was right, justice was wrong. And I had told him so, but did that make him friendly? No, I still believe that I had the law on my side. And I know that I spoke better than I ever spoke before. But I didn't pursue it. I made the enormous blunder of telling a very learned and famous man that he was wrong. Few people are logical. Most of us are prejudiced and biased. Most of us are greeted with the preconceived notion with jealousy, suspicion, fear, envy, and pride. And most citizens don't want to change their mind about their religion or their record or communism or their favorite movie star. So if you are inclined to tell people they are wrong, please read the following paragraph every morning before breakfast. It is from James Harvey Robinson, enlightening book, The Mind in the Making. We sometimes find ourselves changing our mind without any resistance or heavy emotion, but if we are told we are wrong, we will change the intuition and harden our heart. We are intuitively headless in the formation of our belief, but find ourselves filled with an illicit passion for them when everyone proposes to rob us of their companionship. It is obviously not the idea themselves that are dear to us, but our self-esteem which is threatened. The little world mind is the most important one in human affair, and properly to reckon with it is the beginning of wisdom. It has the same force whether it is my dinner, my dog, and my house, or my father, my country, and my God. We not only resent the imputation that our watch is wrong or our car is heavy, but that our conception of the canons of Mars, of the pronunciation of Epictetus, of the medicinal value of salicin, or of the date of Sarkana is subject to revision. We like to continue to believe what we have been accustomed to as a test tube. And the reason may arouse when doubt is cast upon any of our assumptions lead us to seek every manner of excuse for clinging to it. The result is that most of our so-called reasoning consists in finding argument for going on believing as we already do. Carl Rogers, the eminent psychologist who wrote in his book On Becoming a Person, I have found it of enormous value when I can permit myself to understand the other person. The way in which I have worded this may seem strange to you. Is it necessary to permit oneself to understand another? I think it is. Our first reaction to most of the statement which we hear from other people is an evaluation or judgment rather than an understanding of it. When someone expresses some feeling, attitude, or belief, our tendency is almost immediately to feel that's right or that's stupid, that's abnormal, that's unreasonable, that's incorrect, that's not nice. Very rarely do we permit ourselves to understand precisely what the meaning of a statement is to the other person. I once employed an interior decorator to make some draperies for my home. When the bill arrived, I was dismayed. A few days later, a friend dropped in and looked at the draperies. The price was mentioned, and she exclaimed with a note of triumph, "What? That's awful! I am afraid to he put one over on you." True, yes, sir. She had told the truth, but few people like to listen to truth that reflect on the judgment. So being human, I tried to defend myself. I pointed out that the best is usually the cheapest that one can expect to get quality and artistic taste at a bargain basement price and so on. The next day, another friend dropped in, admired the draperies, power over the enthusiasm, and expressed a wish that she could afford such executive creation for a home. My reaction was totally different. Well, to tell the truth, I said I can afford them myself. I paid too much. I'm sorry. I ordered them. When we are wrong, we may admit it to ourselves, and if we are angry, gently and tactfully, we may admit to others and even take pride in our frankness and broad-mindedness. But not if someone is just trying to ram the unpalatable fat down your esophagus. Horace Greeley, the most famous editor in America during the time of Civil War, disagreed violently with Lincoln's policy. He believed that he could bribe Lincoln into agreeing with him by campaign of argument, ridicule, and abuse. He waged this bitter campaign month after month, year after year. In fact, he wrote a brutal, bitter, sarcastic, and personal attack on President Lincoln the night Booth shot him. But did all the bitterness make Lincoln agree with Greeley? Not at all. Ridicule and abuse never do. If you want some excellent solution about dealing with people and managing yourself and improving your personality, read Benjamin Franklin's autobiography, one of the most fascinating life story ever written. One of the classics of American literature, Ben Franklin tells how he conquered the iniquitous habit of argument and transformed himself into one of the most able, suave and diplomatic men in American history. One day when Ben Franklin was a blundering youth, an old Quaker friend took him aside and lashed him with a few stinging truths, something like this: when you are impossible, your opponent has a slap in them for everyone who differs with you. We have become so offensive that nobody cares for them. Your friends to find they enjoy themselves better when you are not around. You know so much that no man can tell you anything. Indeed, no man is going to try, for the effort will lead only to discomfort and hard work. So you are not likely to know any more than you do know, which is very little. One of the finest things I know about Ben Franklin is the way he accepted the smart individuals. He was big enough and wise enough to realize that he was true, so since that he was headed for failure and social disaster. So he made a right about face. He began immediately to change his insolent, opinionated ways. I made it a rule, said Franklin, to forbear all direct contradiction to the sentiment of other and all positive assertion of my own. I even forbade myself the use of every word or expression in the language that imported of his opinions or the certainly, undoubtedly, etc. And I adopted each of them. I conceive, I apprehend, or I imagine a thing to be or so, or it so appear to me at present. When another asserted something that I thought an error, I deny myself the pleasure of contradicting him abruptly and of showing immediately some absurdity in his proposition. And in answering, I began by observing that in certain circumstances, opinion will be right. But in the present case, there appear or seem to me some difference, etc. I soon found the advantage of this changing manner. The conversation I engaged in went on more pleasantly. The modest way in which I proposed my opinion procured them a readier reception and less contradiction. I had less mortification when I was found to be in the wrong, and I more easily rebelled with others to give up their mistake and join with them when I happened to be in the right. And this mode which I at first put on with some violence to natural inclination became at length so easy and so habitual to me that whereas for these 50 years past no one has ever heard a dogmatical expression escape me. And to this habit, after my character of integrity, I think it is necessarily all that I had on so much weight with my fellow citizens when I proposed new institution or alteration in the old and so many interests in public council when I became a member. For I was but a bad speaker, never eloquent, subject to much hesitation when choice of words, hardly correct in language, and yet I generally carried my poems. How to Ben Franklin method working business led to example. Catherine A. Alred of King Mountain, North Carolina is an industrial engineering supervisor for a young processing plant. She told one of her classes how she handled a sensitive problem before and after taking our training. Part of my responsibility, she reported, deals with setting up and maintaining incentive system and standard for our operators so that they can make more money by producing more yarn. The system we were using had worked fine when we had only 2 or 3 different types of yarn. But recently we had expanded our inventory and capabilities to enable us to run more than 12 different varieties. The prison system was no longer adequate to pay the operators fairly for the work being performed and give them an incentive to increase production. I had worked up a new system which will enable us to pay the operator by the class of yarn she was running at any particular time. With my new system in hand, I entered the meeting determined to prove to the management that my system was the right approach. I told them in detail how they were wrong and showed what they were being unfair and how I had all the answers they needed. To say the least, I failed miserably. I had become so busy defending my position on the new system that I had left them no opening to graciously admit the problems on the old one. The issue was dead. After several sessions of this course, I realized all too well what I had made my mistake. I called another meeting and this time I asked what they felt the problem were. We discussed each point and I asked them their opinion on which was the best way to proceed. With a few low-key suggestions or proper interval, I let them develop my system themselves. At the end of a meeting, when I actually presented my system, they enthusiastically accepted it. I am convinced now that nothing good is accomplished and a lot of damage can be done if you tell a person straight out that he or she is wrong. You only succeed in stripping that person of self-dignity and making yourself an unwelcome part of any discussion. Let's take another example and remember this case I am citing are typical of the experience of thousands of other people. R.B. Crowley was a salesman for a lumber company in New York. Crowley admitted that he had been telling hard-boiled lumber inspector for years that they are wrong and he had won the argument too, but it hadn't done any good. For this lumber inspector said Mr. Crowley are like baseball umpires. Once they make a decision, they never change it. Mr. Crowley saw this firm was losing thousands of dollars through the argument he won. So while taking my course, he resolved to change tactics and abandon argument. With what result? Here is the story as he told to the fellow members of his class. Who one morning the phone rang in my office. A lot a hot and bothered person at the other end proceeded to inform me that a car of lumber we had shipped into his plant was entirely unsatisfactory. His firm had stopped unloading and requested that we make immediate arrangement to remove the stock from the yard. After about one-fourth of the car had been unloaded, the lumber inspector reported that the lumber was running 50% below grade. Under the circumstances, they refused to accept it. I've been seeing vacuum fry. I immediately started for his plant and on the way turned over in my mind the best way to handle the situation. Ordinarily, under such circumstances, I should have quoted grading rules and pride. As a result of my own experience and knowledge as a lumber inspector, to convince the other inspector that the lumber was actually up to grade and that he was misinterpreting the rules in his inspection. However, I thought I would apply the principle learned in this training. When I arrived at the plant, I found the purchase agent and the lumber inspector in a wicked humor, both set for an argument and a fight. We walked out to the car that was being unloaded and I requested that they continue to unload so that I could see how things were going. I asked the inspector to go right ahead and lay out the receipt as he had been doing and to put pieces in another pile. After watching him for a while, it began to dawn on me that his inspection actually was much too strict and that he was misinterpreting the rules. This particular lumber was white pine and I knew the inspector was thoroughly schooled in hardwoods but not competent. Experienced inspector on white pine. White pine happened to be my own strong suit. But did I offer my objection or to the way he was creating the lumber? None whatever. I kept on watching and gradually began to ask questions as to why certain pieces were not satisfactory. I did not for one instant insinuate that the inspector was wrong. I emphasized that my only reason for asking was in order what we could give his firm exactly what they wanted his future shipment wanted in future shipments. Asking a question in a very friendly, cooperative spirit and insisting continually that they were right in laying out boards and not satisfactory to the purpose. I got in warmth of an strained relation between us began to thaw and melt away. An occasional carefully put remark on my part gave birth to the idea in his mind that possibly some of these rejected pieces were actually within the grade that they had bought and that the requirement demanded a more expensive grade. I was very careful, however, not to let him think I was making an issue of this point. Gradually, his whole attitude changed. He finally admitted to me that he was not experienced on white pine and began to ask me questions about each pieces as it came out of the car. I would explain why such a piece would came within the grade specified but kept on insisting that we didn't want him to take it if it was unsuitable for the purpose. He finally got to the point where he felt guilty every time he put a piece in the rejected pile. And at last he saw the mistake was on their part for not having specified as good as a grade as they needed. The ultimate outcome was that he went through the entire carload again after I left, accepted the whole lot and we received a check in full. In that one instance alone, a little tact and the determination to refrain from telling the other man he was wrong save my company a substantial amount of cash, it will be hard to place some money value on the goodwill that was saved. Martin Luther King was asked how as a passivity will be an admiral of Air Force General Daniel Jeffrey James. Then the nation's highest ranking black officer Dr. King replied, I judge people by the on principle, not by the on. In a similar way, General Robert E. Lee once spoke to the President of Confederacy Jefferson Davis in the most glowing terms about a certain officer under his command. Another officer in attendance was astonished. General, he said, do you not know that the man of whom you speak so highly is one of the bitterest enemies who misses no opportunity to mailing you? Yes, he replied generally. But the president asked my opinion of him. He did not ask of his opinion of me. For the president asked my opinion of him. He did not ask for his opinion of me. By the way, I am not revealing anything new in this chapter. 2000 years ago, Jesus said, I give with thine adversary quickly. And 2200 years before crashed upon King Ahkoi of Egypt gave his son some astute advice that is sorely needed today. Be diplomatic, counsel the king. It will help you gain your point. In other words, don't argue with a customer or a spouse or a leader adversary. Don't tell them they are wrong. Don't get them instead of use or leader diplomacy. Within a minute walk from a house, there was a wild state of virgin timber where the blackberry thicket foam was wide in the springtime, where the squirrels nested and reared their young, and the horsewood grew as tall as horsehead. Wild state of virgin timber where the blackberry thicket foam wide in the springtime, where the squirrels nested and reared their young, and the horsewood grew as tall as a horsehead. This unspoiled woodland was called Forest Park, and it was forest, probably not much different in appearance from what it was when Columbus discovered America. I frequently walk in this park with Rex, my little Boston bulldog. He was friendly, harmless little hound, and since we rarely met anyone in the park, I took Rex along without a leash or a muzzle. One day we encountered a mounted policeman in the park. A policeman insisted to show his authority. What do you mean by letting the dog run loose in the park without a muzzle and leash? He reprimanded me. Don't you know it's against the law? Yes, I know it is. I replied softly, but I don't think he will do any harm out here. I think you don't think the law doesn't give a tinker damn about what do you think. The dog might kill a squirrel or bite a child. Now I'm going to let you off this time, but if I catch the dog out again without a muzzle and leash, you have to tell it to the judge. I meekly promised to obey, and I did obey for a few times, but Rex did not like the muzzle and neither did I. So we decided to take a chance. I was lovely for a while, and then we struck a snake. Rex and I raced over the brow of wheel one afternoon, and there, suddenly to my dismay, I saw the master of the law astride of a horse. Rex was out in front, leading straight to fourth officer. I was in for it, I knew it, so I didn't wait until the policeman started talking. I beat him to his head. I said, Officer, you caught me dead and I'm guilty. I have no alibis, no excuse. One me last week that I brought the dog out and again thought of mother, you will find me. Well, now the policeman responded, yes, often I know it's a temptation to let a dog like that have a run out there when nobody's around. Sure, it's a temptation, I replied, but it is against the law. Well, a little dog like that is not going to harm anybody. The policeman remonstrated. No, but he may still kill squirrel, I said. Well, now I think you are taking this a bit too seriously. He told me, I tell you what you do. Just let him run over the hill here, there where I can see him, and we forgot all about it. That policeman being the man wanted a feeling of importance, so when I began to condemn myself, the only way he could notice his was to take the magnanimous attitude of showing mercy. Or suppose I had tried to defend myself, what did you ever argue with a policeman? But instead of breaking lances with me, I admitted that he was absolutely right and I was absolutely wrong. I admitted it quickly, openly, and with enthusiasm. The affair tormented graciously in my taking his side and stalking my side. Lord Chesterfield himself could hardly have been more gracious than this mounted policeman, who one day week previously had determined to have the law on me. If we know we are going to be revoked anyhow, isn't it far better to put the other person to it and do it ourselves? Isn't it much easier to listen to self listen than to bear condemnation from alien lips? Say about yourself all the derogatory things you know other person is thinking or wants to say or needs to say, and say them before that person has chance to say them. The chances are 100 to 1 that doesn't dissolve me and could be taken into mystical meanings as a small replacement to 98x. What would be your 27? Fortnite, you are in a commercial artist, use this technique to win the goodwill of petulant scolding buyer of art. It is important in making drawing up for advertising and publishing purpose to be precise and very exact. Mr. Warren said as he told the story. Some art editors demand that their commission be executed immediately, and in this case some slight error is liable to occur. I knew one art director in particular was always delighted to find fault with some inner things. I have often left his office in disgust not because of the criticism but because of his method of attack. Recently, I delivered a workshop to his editor, and he phoned me to call at his office immediately. He said something was wrong. When I arrived, I found that just what I had anticipated and dreaded. He was hostile, gloating over his chance to criticize. He demanded with heat why I had done so and so. My opportunity had come to a persistent criticism. I had been studying about so. I said, Mr. So and so, if what he says is true, I am at fault and there is absolutely no excuse for my blunder. I have been doing drawing for you so long enough to know better I am version of myself. He started to defend me yesterday, but after all this is a serious mistake. It is only that I interpreted him and mistake I said it may be costly and they are all irritating. He started breaking what I was waiting while I was having a game for customer life. I was criticizing myself and loved it. I should have been more careful. I contributed in a lot of work and digital wasting. So I'm going to do this when I'm doing all over. Rono is protested out nothing putting me on to that cover. He praised my work as me that he went about to my actions and that was sliding in hand and costing for many money and after all it was a very little not worth going about. My eagerness to discern myself to call the fight out of him was by taking me to dance. Before he parted, he gave me a second and another permission. There is a sort of different satisfaction in able to polish to admit one's errors.
It not only clear the air, get a deficiencies, but also helps also communicate for the air. Goes and you have to move near imperative of experiment of the system sickly and the discovery is clear. According to that, it's another important experiment that required the mistake you would have period is not specified the entire amount of overfillment. What to the attention of the display that to follow the mistake you will have to reduce the specified the entire amount of overfillment. Improvement that has that will cause serious financial damage. The amount will be recovered and we want to do this service and we would have to open the second layer of the and the same input hard into the cost of the exposure. Are going to decide to the decision to and the whole this was not putting I have to it was I want to discover that I have to make a mistake and then you know the thing to say probably especially the best comfort of the person to get it. So the other person the continuing my experience. I thought it going to go to the office for this and I was but I mean so get to the most of the was copying the very good for I could be because I was having to implement it and I was to mix it. And also this from the overseas. And if we can create differences that are mistake. Compared to weakness that I'm must push the body is one of the body and you want to build a presentation to an influence mistake. For example, one of the most popular things that is to look up or body and the way it being seen in the municipal of cricket starts on this spot. Cricket starts was all the most brilliant because create and they have to talk for investing wood. Then we choose the cricket into was pictures. He would say so long as Bowen logs and process holder and like Napoleon is telling them he would order to operate a Sam daily while in the battlefield. His devoted troops cheered him that Francis Julia as the road of his John Dillett was the Union lines. His kept set under Marcus and the was right here. They cheered and they followed him in touching England, presenting a good famous flag in Baroness Green in the sun. It was a gallant sight. Darling, daring, magnificent of one of admirals and for the Union lines as they beheld it. Biggest troops swept forward and Egypt brought through Orchard and cornfield across a middle and over damage. All the time the Union cannon was tearing gas the walls in the tanks. But on the press festivals or in the Union infantry was moving just from the cemetery areas where they had been hiding and fired body after body into cricket on Western troops. The crest of the USS seat of flame was slaughterhouse of blazing balcony. In a few minutes, all of brigade commanders except one were down on 4 feet of his 5,000 men had fallen. General Lewis, a army state leading the troops in the final plunge, surrendered forward, vaulted over the stone wall and wore his cap on the top of his sword out and giving the steel wise. They did daily over the wall, bayoneted the enemy's skull with cloud's mascot and planted the battle class of the south and cemeteries. The banner waved their only for a moment, but that moment, brief at its was record to the high water mark of Confederacy. Piquet Charles brilliant here. It was nevertheless the beginning of the end. Lee had failed. He could not penetrate the north and he made the south was doomed. Lee was so sad and so shocked that he said in his resignation and asked Jefferson Davis, the president of Confederacy, to approve a Juncker and Avalon who had wanted to blame the disaster of the love Piquet Charles and submarines. He could have found a score of 11 some of the division commanders at 20. The cavalry had only time to support the infantry against the submarine and but Lee was far too more to blame other as Peter and body troops struggled back to Confederate lines over but he rode out to meet them all and Britain with a combination. The later sort of soft level. This was a prima body because I have lost this battle. His internal history have had the courage and character to admit that Michael Sewell noticed the question of control of how the Chinese culture within some space of products and how some countries suddenly recognize for the benefit of applying the principle with more advantages than maintaining a production. We had one middle class member who had been estranged from his son for many years. The father had been open-minded but was not cured. In science tradition and when a person cannot be frustrated, the father felt that it was up to son to make the initiative toward a reconciliation in the early season. He told the class about the grandchildren he had never seen and how much he desired to be reunited with his son. His classmate also understood his contributions to the and long-established tradition. The father felt that young people should have respect for the elders and that he was right not only to desire but to wait for his son to come to him. For the input of father organized his class, I have talked about this problem, he said Dale Carmen said it was one admitted quickly and empathetically. His school of community admitted quickly and I asked him admitted empathetically. I wrong my son was right in not wanting to see me to experiment in his life. I mean, his face was actually universal forgiveness, but I was at fault and it is one something with this. The class approved and giving their full support at the next class. He told me how to use songs of class for and listen for kids and new relations with his son. And say, you should have at least not. I don't know what was wrong with his words and also remember struggling and insisting games of this of my was towards citizen. But however, with his studies, for handling the people need to understand me to this. For example, when somebody is related to the road and to say that he don't agree with such an article and give a calling for the reason that you could horrible answer like this. Come to think it's over, I don't entirely agree with it myself, but everything I wrote yesterday happened to me today. I'm glad to learn what to think of the subject to understand where in the road you must be lost and will get the substance out of all the time. So it is a slap over the months and I know sincerely. How to do is to do me good with the idea to ongoing at least for the budget and tactical on the way of thinking. And we know the what will be suppose what will be going on with ourselves. This I made a mistake quickly and with enthusiasm. Not only with the technique process, but what really determined it is all of my point. Under the circumstance, then trying to defend oneself, remember the old proverb. By fighting, you never get enough, but by yielding, you get more than you expected. Proper funny. If your temper is aroused and you tell him nothing you do, you will have a fine time unloading your feeling. But what about the other person? Will he share your pleasure? Will your bill is red tones your hostile attitude to make it easy for him to agree with you? Will you come at me with a fist of all? Said Udo Wilson, I think I can promise you that mine will do all as fast as possible. And if you come to me and say, let us sit down and take counsel together, and if we differ from each other on this now, I did that we differ. Just what the point at issue, and we will presently find that we are not so far apart after all. That the points on which we differ are few and the points on which we agree are many, and that if we only have the patience and candor and the desire to get together, we will get together. Nobody appreciates the truth of Woodrow Wilson's statement more than John D. Rockefeller Jr. back in 1915. Rockefeller was the most fiercely despised man in Colorado. One of the bloodiest strikes in the history of American industry had been shocking the state of Twitter by years.
Irate Bill ran miners were demanding higher wages from the Colorado Fuel and Iron Company. Rockefeller controlled the company, property had been destroyed, troops had been called out, blood had been shed, Striker had been shot at the body riddled with bullets. At a time like that, with the air seething with hatred, Rockefeller wanted to win the Striker to his way of thinking, and he did. How is the story? After weeks spent in making friends, Rockefeller addressed the representative of the strikers. This speech in its entirety is a masterpiece. It produced astonishing results. It calmed the tempestuous voice of the hate that threatened to engulf Rockefeller. It won him a host of admirers. It presented facts in such a friendly manner that the strikers went back to work without saying another word about the increasing ways for which they had fought so violently. The opening of that remarkable speech followed. Note how it fairly closed with friendliness. Rockefeller, remember, was talking to men who a few days previously had wanted to hang him by the neck to his sore apple tree, yet he could not have been more gracious, more friendly if he had been addressed a group of medical missionaries. His speech was radiant with soft praise as I am proud to be here, having visited your homes, met many of your wise and sweet friends. We meet here not as strangers but as friends. Spirit of mutual friendship, our common interest, it is only by your courtesy that I am here. This is the red letter day in my life, Rockefeller began. It is the first time I have ever had the good fortune to meet the representative of the employee of this great company. Its officer and superintendent together, and I can assure you that I am proud to be here and that I shall remember this gathering as long as I live. Had this meeting been held 2 weeks ago, I should have stood here stranger to most of you, recognizing a few faces. Having had the opportunity last week of visiting all the camps in the southern coalfield and of talking individually with practically all of the representatives except those who were away. Having visited in the homes, met many of your wives and children. We met here not as strangers but as friends, and it is in the spirit of mutual friendship that I am glad to have this opportunity to discuss with you your common interest. Since this is a meeting of the officer of the company and the representative of the employee, it is only by a courtesy that I am here, for I am not so fortunate as to be either one of the other, and yet I feel that I am intimately associated with you men, for in a sense I represent both the stockholders and the directors. Isn't that a super example of the fine art of making friends out of enemies? Suppose Rockefeller had taken a different tack. Suppose he had argued with those minders and hauled devastating facts in the face. Suppose he had told them by stones and insinuation that they were wrong. Suppose that by all the rules of logic he had proved that they were wrong. What would have happened? More anger would have been instead of more hatred, more revolt. If a man sought his rankling with discord and ill feeling toward you, you can win him to your way of thinking with all the logic in Christendom. Scolding parents and domineering bosses and husbands and nagging wives ought to realize that people don't want to change their mind. They can be forced to driven to agree with you or me, or they may possibly be led to if you are gentle and friendly, ever so gently and ever so friendly. Lincoln said that in effect over 100 years ago here at his words. It is an old and true maxim that a drop of honey catches more flies than the gathering of a call. So with men, if you would win a man to you cause first convince him that you are his sincere friend. Daring in a drop of honey that catches his heart, which say that you will is a great high road to his prison. Business executives have learned that it pays to be friendly to be strikers. For example, when 2005, an employees in the White Motor Company plant struck for higher wages and a union shop. Robert F. Black, then president of the company, did not lose his temper and condemn and threaten and talk of tyranny and communists. He actually praised the strikers. He published an advertisement in the Cleveland papers complimenting them on the peaceful way in which they laid down their tools. Finding the strike pickets idle, he bought them a couple of dozen baseball bats and gloves and invited them to play ball on backyard lots for those who prefer bowling. He rented a bowling alley. This friendliness on Mr. Black's part did what friendliness always does, it begot friendliness. So the striker borrowed brooms, shovels, and rubbish carts and began picking up matches, paper, cigarette stubs, and cigar butts around the factory. Imagine striker tidying up the factory ground while battling for higher wages and recognition of the union. Such an event had never been heard of before it long. Tempest history of American labor wars. That strike ended with a compromise settlement within a week, ended without any ill feeling or anger. Daniel Webster, who looked like a god and talked like a Genova, was one of the most successful advocates who ever pleaded a case. Yet he also, in his most powerful argument, with such friendly remarks as, "It will be up to the jury to consider. This may perhaps be worth thinking of. There are some facts that I trust you will not lose sight of, or you will, with the knowledge of naturally easily see the significance of these facts. No bulldozing, no high pressure method, no attempt to force the opinion on another." Webster used the soft spoken, quite friendly approach, and it helped to make him famous. You may never be called upon to settle a strike or address a jury, but you may want to get your rent reduced. Will the friendly approach help you? Then let's see. Yell stopped an engineer wanted to get his rent reduced, and he knew his landlord was hard-boiled. I wrote him, Mr. Stop said in a speech before the class, notifying him that I was vacating my apartment as soon as my lease expired. Because I didn't want to move, I wanted to stay. I thought to get my rent reduced, but the situation seemed hopeless, so other tenants had tried and failed. Everyone told me that the landlord was extremely difficult to deal with, but I said to myself, I'm studying a course in how to deal with people, so I will try it on him and see how it works. He and his secretary came to see me as soon as he got my letter. I met him at the door with a friendly greeting. I fairly bubbled with goodwill and enthusiasm. I didn't begin talking about how high the rent was. I began talking about how much I liked this apartment house. Believe me, I was hot in my approbation and lavish in my praise. I complimented him on the way he ran the building and told him I should like so much to stay for another year, but I couldn't afford it. He had evidently never had such reception from a tenant. He hardly knew what to make of it. Then he started to tell me all his troubles. Complaining tenants, one had written him 14 letters, some of them positively insulting. And the tenant, to break his dishonest calendar, kept the men on the floor above from snoring. What a relief it is, he said, to have a satisfied tenant like you. And then without my even asking him to do it, he thought to raise my rent a little. I wanted more, so I named the figure I could afford to pay, and he said without a word. As he returned to me and asked what decorating can do for you. If I had tried to get the rent reduced method the other tenants were using, I am positive I should have met with the same failure they encountered. It was the friendly, sympathetic, appreciative approach that won. Dean Woodcock of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, superintendent of a department of the local electric company. His staff was called upon to repair some equipment on top of a pole. This type of work had formerly been performed by a different department and had only recently been transferred to a Woodcock section, as though these people had been trained in the work. This was the first time they had ever actually been called upon to do it. Everybody in the organization was interested in seeing if and how they could handle it. Mr. Woodcock, separate office of manager and member of the department of the utility, went to see the operation. Many cars and trucks were there, and a number of people were standing around watching the two lone men on top of the board. Glancing around, Woodcock noticed a man of the street getting up his car with a camera. He began taking pictures of the scene. Utility people are extremely conscious of public relations, and suddenly Woodcock realized that his setup looked like the man with the camera. Over 3 dozen people being called out to do a two-person job. He stood up the street with the photographer. I see you in the operation. Yes, my mother would be more than interested. She wants stuck in the company. This will be an eye opener for her. She may even decide on investment was unwise. I've been telling her for years that a lot of waste motion companies like yours. She's quickly. The newspaper might like this picture too. It does look like it doesn't. I think the same thing in the position, but this was a unique situation. In Woodcock went on to explain how this was the first term of this type of his department and how everybody from the executive town was interested. He assured that mean that under no condition two people could handle the job. The photographer put away his camera. Should Woodcock send and thank him for taking the time to explain the situation to him. Dean Woodcock's friendly approach saved his company much embarrassment and bad publicity. And the member of one of our class, Gerard Yasmin of Littleton, New Hampshire, reported how by using a friendly approach he obtained a very satisfactory settlement on a damage claim. Oddly in the spring, he reported, before the ground had thawed from the winter freezing, there was an unusually heavy rainstorm, and the water, which normally would have run up to nearby ditches and storm went along the road, took a new post onto a building lot where I had just built a new home. Not being able to run off, the water pressure built up around the foundation of the house. The water forced itself onto the concrete basement floor, causing it to explode and the basement filled with water.
between the furnace and the hot water heater. The cost to repair this damage was in excess of $2,000. I had no insurance to cover this type of damage. However, I soon found out that the owner of the subdivision had neglected to put in a stone drum near the house, which could have prevented this problem. I made an appointment to see him. During the 25-mile trip to his office, I carefully reviewed the situation and remembering the things I learned in this was. I decided that showing my anger would not serve any worthwhile purpose. When I arrived, I kept very calm and started by talking about the recent vacation to the West Indies. Then, when I felt the timing was right, I listened to the leader from my water damage. He quickly agreed to do his sharing, helping to correct the problem. A few days later, he called and said, "We'll pay for the damage and also put in a stone to prevent the same thing from happening in the future." Even though it was the fault of the owner of the subdivision, if I had not begun friendly way, there would have been a great deal of difficulty in getting me to agree to the total liability. Years ago, when I was a barefoot boy walking through the woods to a country school out in Northwest Missouri, I read a fable about the sun and the wind. They quarreled over which was the stronger, and the wind said, "I will prove I see the woodman down here with a coat. I bet I can get this coat off him quicker than you can." So the sun went behind the cloud and the wind blew until it was almost a tornado, but the harder it blew, the tighter the woodman took his coat to him. Finally, the wind calmed down and gave up. Then the sun came out from behind the clouds and smiled kindly on the wind. Presently, he mopped his brow and pulled off his coat. The sun then told the wind that gentleness and friendliness were always stronger than fury and force. The use of gentleness and friendliness is demonstrated day after day by people who have learned that drop of honey catches more flies than a gallon of gall if the corner of Mr. Bile Maryland. To do this one, he had to take his 4-month-old car to service department of the car dealer for the third time. He told our classic disappearance that talking to a journey without shouting at the service manager was not going to lead to a satisfactory result of a problem. I walked over to a showroom and asked to see the agency owner. Mr. One, after a short wait, I was ushered into Mr. White's office. I introduced myself and explained to him that I bought my car from his dealership because of the recommendation of friends and who had this dealership dealing with him. I was told that his prices were very competitive and his service was outstanding. He smiled with satisfaction as he listened to me. I then explained the problem I had in the service department. I thought you might want to be aware of the solution that might have a fine depression. I read it. He thanked me for calling this to his attention and assured me that my problem would be taken care of, not only did he personally get involved, but he also laid to me his car to use while mine was being repaired. His shop was a Greek slave who lived at the port of Colossus and is found immortal and fabulous 600 years ago before Christ. Yet the truth he talked about men as there are just as two in Boston and Birmingham now as they were 26th century Athens. The sun can make you take a record more quickly than the wind, and kindness, the friendly approach and appreciation can make you both into more readily than all the bluster and storm in the world. Remember what Lincoln said, "Our drop of honey has more flies than a gallon of gold." The fuck?
The secret of Socrates. In talking with people, don't begin with discussing the things on which you differ. Begin by emphasizing and keep on emphasizing the things on which you agree. Keep emphasizing, if possible, that you are both striving for the same end and that you only know difference is one of the method and not of purpose. Let the other person saying yes, yes at the outset. If your opponent, if possible, from saying no or no response according to the professor overstraight, is the most difficult handicap to overcome. When you have said no, all your pride of personality demands that you remain consistent with yourself. You may later feel that a no was ill advised. Nevertheless, there is a previous pride to consider. Once having said a thing, you feel you must stick to it. Hence, it is of the very greatest importance that a person be started in the affirmative direction. The skillful speaker gets at the outset a number of yes response. This sets the psychological process of listener moving in the affirmative direction. It is like the movement of billiard ball, propel in one direction and make some force to deflect it, far more force to send it back in the opposite direction. The psychological pattern here are quite clear. When a person says no and really means it, he or she is doing far more than saying a word or two letters. The entire organism, glandular, nervous, muscular gather together into a condition of rejection. There is usually a immediate but sometimes an observable degree of physical withdrawal, readiness, or withdrawal. The whole neuromuscular system in short sets itself on guard against acceptance. When to the contrary, a person says yes, none of the withdrawal activities take place. The organism is in forward moving, assertive, open attitude. Hence, the more yes we can at the very outset induce, the more likely we are succeed in capturing the attention for our ultimate proposal. It is a very simple technique, this yes response, and yet how much it is neglected. It often seems as if people get a sense of their own importance by antagonizing others at the outset. Yet I tend to say no at the beginning of a customer, child, husband, or a wife, and it takes the wisdom and the pace of the answers to transform the bristling negative into an affirmative. The use of this yes technique enabled James Everson, was a tailor in the Greenwich Savings Bank in New York City, to secure a prospective customer who might otherwise have been lost. This man came in to open an account, said Mr. Everson, and I gave him our user form to fill out. Some of the questions he answered unwillingly, but they were often he flatly refused to answer. Before I began the study of human race, I would have told this prospective deposit that if he refused to give the bank this information, we should have refused to accept this account. I asked him that I have been guilty of doing that very thing in the past. Naturally, an ultimatum like that made me feel good. I had shown who was boss that the bank rules and regulations could not be flouted, but that sort of attitude certainly gave a feeling of welcome and importance to the men who were working to give us this patronage. I reserved his morning to use a little horse sense. I reserved not to talk about what the bank wanted, but what the customer wanted, and above all this, I was determined to get him saying yes, yes from the very start. So I agreed with him. I told him the information he refused to give was not absolutely necessary. However, I said, suppose you have money in this bank at your desk, would you like to have the bank transferred to your list of a king who is entitled to it according to law? Yes, of course, he replied. Don't you think I continue that it would be good idea to give us the name of a list of kings so that we will not afraid that you will carry out your wishes without delay? Again, he said yes. The young man attitude softened and changed when he realized that we weren't asking for his information for our sake, but for his sake. Before leaving the bank, this young man not only gave the complete information about himself, but he opened administration of trust account, naming his mother as the beneficiary for his account, and he had gladly answered all the questions concerning his mother also. I found that by getting him to say yes, yes from the outset, he forgot the issue at stake and was happy to do all the things I suggested. Joseph Allison, a sales representative for a Westinghouse Electric Company, had his story to tell. There was a man in my territory that our company was most eager to sell to. My predecessor had called on me for 10 years without selling anything. When I took over the territory, I called steadily for 3 years without getting an order. Finally, after 13 years of calls and sales, we sold him a few motors. If this proved to be alright, an order for several thousands more would follow. So was my expectation. Right, I knew they would be alright. So when I called 3 weeks later, I was in high spirit. The chief engineer greeted me with a shocking announcement. Allison, I can buy the remainder of the motors from you. Why? I asked in amazement. Why? Because your motors are too hot, I can put my hand on them. I knew it would not do any good to argue. I had tried this sort of thing too long. So I thought of getting the yes is responsible. Now look, Mr. Smith, I said, I agree with you 100% if these motors are running too hot. You ought not to buy any more of them. You must have motors that won't run any hotter than standard set by the National Electrical Manufacturer Association. Isn't that so? He agreed it was. I had gotten my first yes. The Electrical Manufacturer Association regulation said that a properly designed motor may have temperature of 72 degrees Fahrenheit. Average room temperature is just correct. Yes, he agreed. That's quite correct. But a motors are much correct. Much hotter. I did not argue with my midlife. How hot is the mill room? Oh, it's about 75 degrees Fahrenheit. Well, I replied, each mill room is 75 degrees and you 8 centigrade. That makes a total of 147 degrees Fahrenheit. Will not is calculated if you held it under a speaker of hot water at a temperature of 140 degrees Fahrenheit. Again, he say yes. Well, as such, wouldn't it be a good idea to keep your hand off those motors? Well, I guess you're right here. He called him to chat for a while. Then he called his secretary and lined up approximately $35,000 worth of business for the ancient move. It took me years and cost me countless thousands of dollars in lost things before I finally learned that it doesn't pay to argue and it is much more productive and much more interesting to look at things from the other person looking and try to get that person saying yes, yes. It is now we spent around 4 in Oakland, California tells how he became a good customer of a shop because the proprietor got him to say yes, yes. Eddie had become interested in how bow hunting had spent considerable amount of imports equipment and supplies from a local bow store. When his brother was visiting, he wanted to rent a bow for him from the store. The sister told him they did not rent bows, so Eddie found another bow store. Eddie described what happened. A very pleasant gentleman answered the phone. His response to my question for a rental was completely different from the other place. He said he was sorry, but they no longer need to go because they could afford to do so. He then asked me if I had rented before. I replied yes, the place. So he replied that I provided to pay $25 to $30 for the rental. I said yes again. He then asked if I was the kind of person who liked to save money, and I said yes, yes. He wanted to explain that they had both set with all the necessary for sale for $95. I could buy a complete set for only $495 more than I could rent one. They explained that it's why they had this confidence in them. I think that was reasonable. My yes response led to a WhatsApp they said, and when I pick it up, I spotted several more items as a sub and I have since become a regular customer. Socrates, the glad fly of Athens, was one of the greatest philosophers the world has ever known. It is something that only a handful of men in knowledge to have been able to do. He sharply changed the whole course of human thought, and now 24th century after his death, he is honored to be as one of the wisest philosophers who ever existed in this brand new world. His method did hit people they were wrong, no not Socrates was far too accurate for that. His whole technique, now called the Socratic method, was based on open getting a yes response. He asked question with whose opponent will not happy agree. He kept on winning one admission after another until he had an armful of yes. He kept on asking questions until finally almost realizing it. His opponent found this so impressing of conclusion they would have bitterly denied a few minutes previously. The next time we are tempted to steal someone here, cease from less, remember old Socrates and ask a gentle question. A question that will get the yes response. The Chinese have a proverb pregnant with the age-old wisdom of the Orient. He who treats softly goes far. They have spent 5,000 years studying human nature. Those culture scientists and they have gathered a lot of perspicacity. Who treats softly goes far.